So this evening we are very lucky to have one of our local heroes, and I don't use that term loosely. She's an amazing person, an incredible journalist, but Barbara has spent her time not just in our community, but in other places, trying to help people and get them back into their normal lives. And after disaster, that's never easy. And the thing that I'm most proud of about somebody like that is that the best way to get to know yourself is by in service with others. And that was Mahatma Gandhi who said that. And Barbara, this evening, our presenter, is certainly somebody that fits into that role. So without further ado, Barbara, thank you.
Thank you, John. Thank you all for coming tonight. If you don't know me already, I'm Barbara Wood. I've lived in Woodside since 1985, and my husband Dan Fitzpatrick and I raised our 3 redheaded children here from Woodside Parents Nursery School through Woodside High School. And in 2018, I retired after 27 years at the Almanac, where I covered local government and schools and quite a bit more. So I want to preface what I'm saying here by letting you know that I am not a public speaker. I'm a writer, so I'm going to be mostly reading to you tonight. I know I should have gone to Toastmasters with Dan and the Bouchholders, but I didn't like to get up that early in the morning, so I can't do quite as good as I had. But so I have a history with disasters. My first was when I was 6 years old and living near Salem, Oregon, when what is known as the Columbus Day storm blew through with wind speeds nearly 90 miles an hour clocked near us. I still remember my mom meeting my older sister and I at the school bus and pulling us across the field against the wind. And I remember our family of 8 huddled around a wood stove in the dark. And in the morning, our huge barn had blown over, and the mobile home that was my father's office had been blown apart. So years later, early in my career, when I was a reporter for the Times Tribune, I covered 2 disasters, both in 1983. And after a 6.7 earthquake in Coalinga, I slept in a gymnasium alongside the National Guard. And in those pre-cell phone days, I sent my story in by dictating it over a landline. When Alviso flooded, I rode into the inundated area in the back of a truck full of more National Guards. And both of those events were quite a bit more interesting to me than covering a city council meeting. So with that start, you might think I would have joined the National Guard, but instead, in 2006, the year after Hurricane Katrina devastated the New Orleans area, I joined the Red Cross, inspired by my aunt, Vinnie Bieberdorf, a Los Altos resident who passed away late last year. We camped with Aunt Vinnie every year, and she often talked about her Red Cross service. I think I am behind here. Her service eventually spanned more than 50 years. Her disaster assignments included New York after 9/11 and working as assistant manager of the Cajun Dome after Katrina. I decided that I also wanted to be there after a disaster to help those so desperately in need of it. At that time, the Red Cross required a minimum 3-week commitment for a national disaster assignment. And so I figured that once my youngest child got her driver's license, that my family could survive without me for that long. So about 6 months after that driver's license was issued, in September 2008, Hurricane Ike headed straight towards Texas, just as I finished training as a shelter worker. I was assigned, given 24 hours to pack and get on a plane, and flew to Fort Worth the day before the hurricane was predicted to make landfall. I was gone 24 days, working first in an evacuation shelter at the Sugar Hill United Methodist Church in Texarkana, and later as part of a feeding operation on Galveston Island. In Texarkana, I was one of 6 Red Crossers helping the church congregation run a shelter for 54 evacuees, including 21 children. They had been bused from Port Arthur, Texas, and most of them lacked the resources to evacuate on their own. So that first night, I worked all night watching the weather station with the more nervous residents as Ike made landfall. They worried about their homes and their possessions, their friends, their family, and their pets that were left behind. In the days that followed, the evacuees coped with being away from homes that might not still be there, sleeping on cots in close quarters with people who snored, sniffled, and walked in their sleep. I mediated nighttime thermostat wars and was yelled at by a large, angry ex-convict when I tried to shush him at 2 a.m., but there were security guards on site. I was also tightly hugged by children and grandmothers, had an evacuee spend 3 hours braiding my hair, and that's her in this picture, to the great delight of the rest of the shelter residents, and heard the life stories of dozens of people who lived very different lives than I did. When the power came back on in Port Arthur and the shelter closed 9 days later, the residents still knew little about the fate of their community. I wiped some tears and received some powerful hugs before they filed back on their buses. This shows some of the destruction wrought on Galveston Island and also proof that a sense of humor can survive flooding. After we helped clean the church, I volunteered to go to Galveston Island, which in 1900 was the site of our country's deadliest disaster, when at least 6,000 people died in a hurricane. This time, winds hit at up to 110 miles an hour, and most of the island had been under many feet of water. After a stint washing out food chests, I spent most of my time in Red Cross emergency response vehicles delivering food cooked by the Southern Baptists. Along with the fleet of Salvation Army canteens, we drove throughout the island, delivering hot meals, water, ice, and other comforts to those cleaning up. I saw homes that had been washed across streets and pancaked on top of other homes. Front yard trash piles that included the entire contents of homes, plus their sheetrock, and many, many tired, dirty people. We were paid in smiles, hugs, and blessings. When Walmart reopened, I went in to buy a baseball cap because I didn't have one. And when the hat didn't have a price tag, the cashier just gave it to me, and I still have it. One day, a local Red Cross volunteer showed us his badge as he took a meal off our vehicle. With tears threatening, he told me he had never imagined he would be taking aid from the Red Cross instead of offering it. I assured him he could repay us by helping in California when we were hit by our next fire or earthquake. This is after the Oak Fire that was in Mariposa in 2022 up by Yosemite. For some reason, that experience in Texas hooked me on the Red Cross. In the coming years, I responded whenever my family and my work could spare me. That was usually once or twice a year. I worked hurricanes, tornadoes, floods, wildfires, mudslides, and volcanic eruptions. I've been to Arkansas, California, Connecticut, Florida, Georgia, Hawaii, Louisiana, Mississippi, Montana, New Jersey, New York, North Carolina, North Dakota, South Dakota, Texas, Tennessee, Washington State, and Wyoming on disaster responses, and in many of those states more than once. And I'm sure that most of those places are places that I would have never visited. But as the years passed, the requests for volunteers came more and more frequently. There were more and bigger disasters every year. According to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, better known as NOAA, in 2023, there were 28 weather or climate-related disasters that each caused more than $1 billion in damage. So if you're like me, big numbers like this all kind of run together. But what is significant is that in the last year and for the previous 4 years, there have been 3 times as many large disasters than had been the average for the years of 1980 to 2023. And to put the impact of these disasters in another way, the New York Times reported just on February 22nd that in 2023 alone, 2.5 million people were forced from their homes in the U.S. by weather-related disasters, according to a study that the Census Bureau did. That is 3 times the entire population of San Francisco. This might be hard to see, but back there is the Statue of Liberty, and this is taken from Red Hook in Brooklyn after Hurricane Sandy, which by then had been downgraded to a superstorm, hit New York City in 2012, and I was there. The Red Cross has learned to expect the unexpected. Wildfires that consume entire suburban neighborhoods, hurricanes that hit places like New York, floods that statistically should come every 100 years, hitting twice in a decade, record-breaking heat day after day after week, as well as record-breaking snow and cold. Right now, Texas has the biggest wildfire in its history. Climate disasters take a disproportionate toll on low-income families, diverse communities, older adults, and people with disabilities. For families who already face socioeconomic challenges, a disaster-caused displacement can be catastrophic, decimating savings and sometimes eliminating a job. The Red Cross is changing in response to this new reality. We're working to grow our 90% volunteer workforce and the infrastructure that allows us to respond 24/7 all across the country when disaster strikes ever more frequently. We are offering more aid in emergency shelters, with recovery, with more financial assistance to families that have the most unmet needs, and to bridge the gap between immediate assistance and what they get long term. We're also working to make communities that are most vulnerable to disasters more resilient in non-disaster times, so that they can more easily recover when a disaster hits, by increasing access to health and mental health services, nutritious food, and safe housing. And my work with the Red Cross has also changed. Until 2014, I did many Red Cross jobs. I worked in shelters, feeding, cataloging the extent of a disaster damage, and helping those who were affected with their recovery. But after a couple of national disaster assignments doing public affairs, I decided to concentrate my efforts on what I do best, telling stories through words and photos for the Red Cross. And I'm going to now tell you some of them. This is Joe playing on a donated guitar outside a fire evacuation shelter. I met Joe, a 65-year-old widower, musician, and student of theology, soon after he escaped the Camp Fire, which destroyed most of his community of Paradise on November 8th, 2018. I was working in the shelter where Joe was staying at the Oroville Nazarene Church. Well, Red Cross volunteers usually stay in a separate staff shelter because it was right after, or it was actually during the fire, and so many people were displaced, there were not very many places to stay. So we also slept in the church on cots set up in a couple of classrooms. But within a few days, both the evacuees and the Red Cross volunteers started coming down with the norovirus, which, if you've ever had it, it is a terrible and very contagious stomach bug. So I was lucky enough, after I threw up, to be able to drag myself down the church hallway to where the nurses were stationed, and they gave me an anti-nausea drug, which actually worked, and before I moved into an isolation room with others who also had the bug, including Joe. So Joe told me how he had escaped the fire, and I don't think I'll ever forget it. He said he had been up most of the night, unable to sleep. The power was out, but a bright light outside caught his attention. Looking out, he saw the building just 30 feet away was on fire, as was another building in his senior complex of about 100 apartments. Joe said he immediately grabbed his walker and left, barefoot. By then, the roof of his own complex was burning. Trees burst into flames, embers flew, and windows blew out. It sounded like bullets exploding. Joe crouched behind a dumpster when the wind whipped the firestorm. Some of the apartments started exploding behind me, he said. That's when I lost my walker. It went flying across the parking lot. When the rubber lid to the dumpster caught fire, he crawled across the parking lot to his walker. If I had stayed there, I would have caught on fire, he said. Joe could only see about 20 feet through the smoke, not even to the street. He said he didn't have time to be afraid. I just knew I had to get out of there, he said. I knew I had to go, to keep moving. Soon after Joe made it to the street, knees bloodied, a police car stopped for him. After picking up one other man escaping from the fire, they drove to the evacuation shelter at the Nazarene Church. Joe had lived in paradise for 15 years. When his home burned, he lost all his musical instruments, his keyboards, guitars, amplifiers, and foot pedals, as well as all the music he'd collected over the years. He'd lost his library of about 2,000 books on theology, psychology, philosophy, and quantum mechanics, as well as music, he said. And in this picture here, Joe got done talking to me, and there was a group of young people who were setting up to entertain the people in the shelter. And he ran over and he asked if he could use their keyboard, and he started playing and belting out Amazing Grace. And then he got done and he just sighed and he said, I had to do that. So this is a San Mateo County volunteer, Deborah Torres, with Jose and his grandson. And I think you can see the compassion in the eyes of Deborah Torres. She joined the Red Cross in 2013 within 3 months of her retirement from the county after a long career in social services and public mental health. And she's listening to Jose tell how his family was sound asleep at their apartment in South San Francisco early on a Tuesday morning in January of 2023 when they were jolted awake by the entire roof blowing off their 4-unit apartment building. At first we thought it was an earthquake, Jose said. Water started pouring in through the ceiling light fixtures. The family called the fire department, which quickly responded and told them about the Red Cross shelter that had been opened at the San Mateo County Event Center to provide a refuge from the storm for all who needed it. The family arrived at about 4 a.m., and they found a portable cot on site for the baby, warm beds for everyone else in the family, food and supplies such as diapers and toiletries. In the morning, there were warm showers and breakfast. The Red Cross has been excellent, Jose told me, holding his 9-month-old grandson. I've got nothing but nice to say about the Red Cross. Jose said the Red Cross had actually helped him years ago when he had a fire in his apartment. Then Jose excused himself to grab a broom and a dustpan and clean up around his family's cots. The Red Cross is helping, so I can help too, he said. This is Frances Walker with Barbara and her dog Dilly. I met Barbara in late 2022 after Hurricane Ian through Frances Walker, a Red Cross disaster mental health volunteer from Highland, Texas, who had a cot near mine in a 100-person tent shelter for disaster responders, one of 5 such tents at the fairgrounds in North Fort Myers, Florida. It was a big hurricane. Frances, like all Red Cross disaster mental health and health services volunteers, is a credentialed professional who has to keep her license up to date in order to volunteer. She was spending her days offering comforts to distressed shelter residents and shelter workers as they tried to manage the chaos left behind after the massive hurricane. But when Frances needed her own mental health recharge, she told me, she visited Barbara and Dilly. Barbara was in her second week of living in the Red Cross shelter with hundreds of others at the Hertz Arena in Estero. It was an ice hockey arena. Cots had been placed on the covered ice rink with extra bedding to make up for the cold. Barbara and some others had personalized their own spaces in nooks and crannies of the arena. Barbara made a little nest-like area for herself and her pets by folding up some of the rinkside seats and padding the area with donated blankets. When I asked how she was coping, Barbara told me she looked at it as the experience of a lifetime, maybe even an adventure. Friends had invited her to live with them, and she was happy about the options she had. Barbara also said she didn't mind that all of the items she had inherited from relatives in recent years were now gone because she was no longer responsible for them. It's a clean slate, she said with a smile. Barbara had lived in St. James City for 18 years, pouring money and creativity into remodeling her 41-year-old mobile home from the ground up. When she first saw her home after the storm, it appeared just fine, but inside, evidence of the storm's power was obvious. The washer-dryer was floating out the back lanai, and water had gone up as high as 15 feet. I kind of climbed over things with this gooey slime on everything, she said. Even the dresser drawers were full of water. Barbara had registered with FEMA for relief assistance and was waiting for a new cell phone to be delivered. Hers died after the boat ride off the island. Her car survived the hurricane, though, because she had driven it to the local Moose Lodge, a concrete building on high ground where she rode out the storm. Barbara said she would retrieve her car soon because the bridge to the island had reopened, but then she was going to return to the shelter. There's no way I can stay on the island, she said. After Hurricane Charlie, I got pneumonia from the black mold. This is Denny Breckenridge with Jessica and her newborn. Some Red Cross volunteers go to heroic lengths to help those affected by disasters. And one of these is Denny Breckenridge, a retired labor and delivery nurse and midwife from Gainesville, Florida. During her long career, starting in 1976, Denny personally delivered 300 babies and helped deliver as many as 3,000 more. In late September 2021, Denny came to southern Louisiana as part of the Red Cross Health Services team, caring for shelter residents after Hurricane Ida had slammed the state. At a Berwick, Louisiana shelter, Denny met Jessica, a single mother who was nearing the delivery date for her second child. Denny helped Jessica make sure she was getting the prenatal care she needed and monitored her for warning signs of trouble with the pregnancy. Denny even slept on a cot in the shelter office when other Red Crossers moved to a separate staff shelter as the baby's due date neared. Denny said she stayed even though emergency medical technicians were on site overnight because she knew they just couldn't match her expertise in helping with the birth, and labor often starts at night. As the date for Denny's return home to Florida drew near and the baby still hadn't arrived, Denny asked to stay a few more days so she could continue to be there for Jessica. "Can I see this through? Can I be with her? Can I help her?" Denny asked her manager. The answer was a supportive and resounding yes. Denny was by Jessica's side in the hospital, coaching her through labor. "I think she was really happy I was there," Denny said. "She really didn't have anybody else." In the mid-afternoon of August 29th, after a long sleepless night for Jessica and Denny, the baby was born. She had a beautiful little girl, Denny said. She stayed the next night as well to coach Jessica in breastfeeding her daughter. Denny and a team of Red Crossers also worked with the state of Louisiana and with FEMA to make sure that Jessica, the baby, and her 3-year-old wouldn't have to return to cots in the Red Cross shelter when they were released from the hospital. And when they got her that hotel room, I think they celebrated that almost as much as they did the birth of the baby. Even as Denny finally headed home to Florida, she took calls from Jessica about how to care for her infant. "I was just kind of walking her through everything," Denny said. Denny said she sees her Red Cross work and other volunteering she's done as a heart and soul thing. "This is not just a volunteer job. It's much deeper than that," she said. These are 5 of Josephine's 6 children playing in the water outside a shelter. So another Red Cross shelter resident who completely humbled me was Josephine, who had to evacuate from the Caldor fire in 2021. She and her 6 children spent the first 2 nights of their August 17th evacuation sleeping very close together in the family's suburban. Then they heard about the shelter that had been opened in the Green Valley Church in Placerville. After a few more nights in the church parking lot in 2 borrowed tents, the family moved into a church classroom. Josephine called the ordeal more than a challenge, which is probably an understatement. If it weren't for kind people, the Red Cross, I probably wouldn't have made it, she said. On the day of the evacuation, Josephine had just returned from dropping her 15-year-old oldest son off at school when a neighbor told her they had been ordered to get out ahead of the looming fire. The smoke billowing up like thunderclouds in the distance gave the order an ominous reality. They spent 30 minutes loading mostly clothing into their SUV, grabbed their terrier mix dog, and left with no clear destination in mind. Even during the nights the family slept in the SUV, Josephine said her son continued to attend school. Opening day for the other children's schools was delayed by the evacuation. Josephine said the Red Cross, the church, and other generous community members made sure all their needs were met. They were able to pick up clothing, blankets, even shoes for one of the children. I basically came in with only the clothes on my back, Josephine said. On September 1st, after hearing from El Dorado County Sheriff's Office officials that their neighborhood might soon be reopened, the children joyously played with donated toys, a sprinkler, and a kiddie pool on the lawn outside their temporary quarters. Josephine smiled as she mused about what they'd do when they first returned home. First thing, take a real shower, she said. Then she said she put the kids all in the bathtub and let them soak. I was so impressed with how Josephine, a single mother, graciously coped with 6 children amid the uncertainties of an evacuation. But then what really impressed me was what she told me later, that she was actually these children's biological grandmother, and she had adopted each one of them when their parents couldn't care for them. So she was my age. And I just threw this in here because it's cute baby pictures. This is Jesse and Mateo. They were staying in the same shelter. Jessie was only 2 weeks old when her family evacuated, so by the time I took these pictures, she had spent half her life in the shelter. This is volunteer Marianne McNamara playing with destiny. Last year, when California was hit by back-to-back serious storms, some people had to evacuate from their homes more than once, which is a uniquely stressful experience. And this time, Red Cross volunteers came from across the country to help us out. Marianne McNamara, a disaster mental health volunteer from Annandale, Virginia, gave 4-year-old shelter resident Destiny's mom a little time to herself by drawing on the floor of the Santa Cruz County Fairgrounds in Watsonville with Destiny. The shelter opened in January to house those displaced by the first round of flooding, which started on New Year's Eve, and then it had to reopen when much of the neighboring community of Pajaro was evacuated when a levee was breached during a later round of storms. This is Tirza and Barry with Tirza's mascot, Gumby. One of the characteristics of a good Red Crosser is flexibility, and Semper Gumby is a favorite slogan. It takes flexibility to travel with less than 24 hours notice, to sleep on cots, to do without showers, and sometimes to move lodging several times in a 2-week assignment. If you're lucky, you get to share a hotel room with a stranger. If not, a gymnasium with a couple hundred new friends. Yet volunteers like Tirza Pearl, and now her husband since he's retired, do it over and over again. Tirza joined the Red Cross soon after the devastating Oakland Hills fire in 1991. They live in San Francisco. Since then, she figures she's been on at least 60 Red Cross national assignments. For years, she's taken Gumby and his sidekick Pokey with her. Both the Pearls were working in a Red Cross shelter in the Cameron Park Community Center after the Caldor fire. It was Barry's second deployment. The people who volunteer for the Red Cross are an amazing group, Barry said. They devote heart and soul to the clients. These are 3 photos of one of my favorite subjects after cute babies, shelter dogs. So if you know me, you know I adore dogs, and I also love to take pictures of dogs and other pets in shelters, maybe because it's usually so obvious that they are doing a great job of keeping their human companions calm in a time of stress. And yes, I may have been cautioned a time or two for letting pit bulls lick me in the face, but I do it anyway. I took the picture of Frank and his dog Maggie, who were staying in a shelter in the Cameron Park Community Center in El Dorado County during the Caldor fire, just because I thought Frank had such a beautiful smile, even after 2 weeks of living in a shelter. And Maggie's pretty cute too. Lori Mursh and her dog Freckles were resting for a moment at the Red Cross shelter at the Green Valley Church in Placerville, where they had been staying after the Caldor fire. And of course, that's me in the middle, getting my own little mental health refresh from one of the dogs staying outside the shelter at the Santa Cruz County Fairgrounds last year during our atmospheric river floods. Daisy and Chrissy had to evacuate from their home in Pollock Pines during the Caldor fire. They slumped in a tent in the parking lot so they could stay together. But it's pretty hot there, so some of the Red Cross volunteers, worried that Daisy might get overheated spending her days in the hot parking lot, filled up a wading pool with ice left over from the shelter ice chests. Red Cross volunteer Carrie Odegaard of Fargo, North Dakota, transferred the ice into the pool as Daisy and Chrissy eagerly awaited. These pictures are of Sherilyn and her mom and her husband. I took these photos of Sherilyn and her family in 2021 during the Caldor fire on one of the happiest days for evacuees, when they get to go home. Later, Sherilyn sent the most amazing note to the Red Cross. Sherilyn said that it was 12:30 a.m. when the light went out and the flames grew visible, and she knew they had to leave their home. Sherilyn had only 15 minutes to get her mother, who has late-stage Alzheimer's, her husband, who has epilepsy, herself, 3 dogs, and 1 cat into the car. We had little but ourselves, Sherilyn wrote. She said they had no expectations when they arrived at the shelter, but found what she called the safest, most giving place I have ever been. The Red Cross volunteers didn't know me. I wasn't a neighbor or a friend, yet they granted us safe harbor and provided for us, she wrote. Mom wanders and the Red Cross shielded and sheltered her, Sherilyn wrote. You adopted us, and we saw this repeated with many others. Goodness, I saw love here. Sherilyn said she had expected her community to be supportive in the crisis, but not strangers. Well, now these strangers are my friends, she wrote. This is Marta and Gabriela saying goodbye to each other, and then Gabriela introducing Marta to her husband and Gabriela's new baby boy. Quite often, Red Cross volunteers form strong connections with the people they help, but often, once the Red Crossers go home, they have no way of knowing what happened to the people they worked with. But I was lucky enough to witness a heartfelt reunion between Marta Narviz, who was in Fort Myers, Florida, for her second 3-week stint on November 30th, and Gabriela and her weeks-old baby boy, David. Marta, a retired Army vet, met Gabriela while part of the Red Cross Latino engagement team. The bilingual volunteers go into neighborhoods with Spanish-speaking residents who might have been affected by a disaster to find out what they need and to get them their help. Gabriela's home had been badly damaged, but even though she was 9 months pregnant, she didn't want to leave. So Marta spent 3 days convincing Gabriela to go to a Red Cross shelter. When she arrived, Gabriela was evaluated by a Red Cross Health Services volunteers who were able to get her lodging in a hotel because of her condition. Marta and her husband, Vincent Leandri, served in the Army together and joined the Red Cross together. Both are native Spanish speakers, and because their language skills were so needed, they stayed in Fort Myers for 3 weeks, then returned to their home near Tampa for a short rest, So Marta and Vincent returned to Fort Myers for 3 more weeks. I since saw them in California. They came here too. The Red Cross just really treasures our bilingual volunteers because so many of the people who we are trying to help don't speak English. So this reunion happened when Marta and Vincent stopped by to offer their language skills at a Red Cross service center where people affected by the flood were registering for financial assistance. They saw Gabriella and baby David and had their emotional reunion. And we actually told this story to the whole group of Red Crossers at our morning meeting, and everybody was just excited by the fact that, you know, they actually got to see these people again who they had helped earlier, because it's a fairly rare thing. This is Maria and her 3 children. Maria and her children, 8-year-old Adrian, 5-year-old Abigail, and 2-year-old Alejandro, had to move out of their agricultural housing in Watsonville twice in the first few weeks of 2023 when the property flooded. Maria, a single mother who works full-time in an assisted living facility, could only afford substandard housing for her family. Both times their home flooded, the Red Cross came to their rescue, Maria said. The first time was on New Year's Eve when a local Red Cross disaster action team, which responds to smaller scale local disasters, provided them with a night in a hotel, food, clothing, and blankets. When the home flooded a second time 2 weeks later, the family stayed in a Red Cross shelter at the Santa Cruz County Fairgrounds in Watsonville, where Maria told me they were given 3 meals a day, snacks and drinks, and essentials such as socks, diapers, and toiletries. The shelter also had showers, plus toys and activities for the kids. It was perfect, Maria said. They gave us a bed, clean blankets, a really safe place for us to stay. Red Cross workers made my little family happy, Maria said. We felt secure. When the family returned home to try to clean up the mud and mess left behind, Red Cross volunteers brought food and drinks and cleanup supplies to Maria and her neighbors. And even though they were no longer staying in the shelter, they could still get meals and take showers there, which they needed because they didn't have any running water in their home for weeks. But I was able to check in with Maria when the next round of storms hit the area, and I went back to Watsonville for a second time. And she told me that she and her children were lucky enough to have moved to the top of the waiting list for subsidized housing. They had moved into an apartment that did not flood. This story had a happy ending. This is Holly Ebden in front of a Red Cross emergency response vehicle. You know, sometimes people ask me, like, how do you find stories? And it's like, I just talk to people, and they almost all have stories. And Holly is an example. I met her in late 2021, a few weeks after Hurricane Ida had slammed into Louisiana, and she was serving food from a Red Cross emergency response vehicle. She was on her 19th national assignment in less than 2 years. I've just been constantly on deployment, Holly said. I love it. Holly, a former elementary school teacher from England, joined the Red Cross to help teach preparedness to 3rd to 5th graders after she was stranded in the U.S. when COVID-19 hit. Soon she joined the team that helps those displaced by home fires. Then Holly heard the Red Cross really needed volunteers to respond to bigger disasters. Holly told me she had only been at home in Ohio about 6 weeks of the previous year. In fact, she said, when she had to get stitches after she cut her hand on a Red Cross assignment, she cried. The doctor asked her if it hurt, but Holly told him, I don't want to go home. Deployment is my life. Holly said that even when travel was again possible, she advised her family that they should wait until January or February to visit when it wouldn't be hurricane season. This is Heather and Aaron. I met Heather and Aaron and 2 of their 4 children in 2022 after the Oak Fire had destroyed wide swaths of the area near Mariposa and Yosemite. The Red Cross had opened a shelter in an elementary school in Mariposa. And as in all Red Cross shelters, we welcomed anyone affected by the fire, even if they weren't staying in the shelter, to stop in for meals or other Red Cross services such as healthcare or mental health support. As they grabbed a meal, Erin and Heather told me and a colleague about the very, very special complex they had rented, located at the top of a dead-end road. Their home had been built by a Vietnam vet who said when he returned from the war that he wanted to build a village that wouldn't be destroyed. The structures, including several sleeping cottages, a central kitchen and dining area, and a meditation hut where visitors often stayed, were handmade from cedar, with views out to tall trees and the mountains. Statues of Buddha and other benevolent figures were scattered around the property, as were special rocks and crystals the family had collected over the years. The day the fire started, Friday, July 22nd, the family had gone into Merced to run errands. By the time they heard about the evacuation and tried to get home to rescue some of their treasures and their pets, the roads were closed. The fire swept through their home and everything that wasn't with them on their shopping trip, leaving ashes and the charred and melted remains of their possessions behind. In my years as a Red Cross volunteer, I've learned that hugs have great power to let someone know you care and to relieve stress. So before Heather and Erin left, I asked them if I could hug them. As I wrapped my arms around both of them at the same time, I felt their pain at their loss and their strength and their resolve to recover. That night, Heather texted me that they had found a temporary home to move into, and in subsequent days, they made sure to let us know when they would be at the shelter to pick up some meals so that we could visit. One evening, when they came to eat, Erin was heartbroken when they arrived because they'd been to their home site and found 2 of their cats didn't survive. I gave him another hug and I told him how sorry I was, and I was really proud of myself because I didn't cry. But then Erin said he had something to give me. He handed me a piece of lava rock he had dug from the ashes of their home. He told me the rock was snowflake obsidian they had originally found at the top of a nearby mountain. This is my rock here. I cradled the rock in my hand and began to cry, overcome with how much the gift of this rock, born in the fire of a volcano and then pulled out of the ashes of a fire, meant to me. After Heather and Erin left, another Red Crosser who had witnessed my meltdown asked, "What just happened?" "They gave me a rock," I sobbed, and then I explained. Another Red Cross volunteer called a friend who collects rocks and crystals and asked about this specific rock. Her friend said snowflake obsidian can take away negative emotions. So I looked it up, and I was astonished at what I found. It said this material dissolves shocks, fears, and traumas, both physical and emotional pains. Like a sky full of beautiful snowflakes, snowflake obsidian restores something, a deep, abiding sense of protection and reverence. So I'm not a very spiritual person or really one to believe in the power of rocks, but I do think that this rock is pretty darn cool. And for the rest of my time in Mariposa, Red Crossers all passed around my rock. We wanted to believe. And now I keep this rock on my fireplace mantle with a number of other things that are precious to me. And Heather keeps in touch with me and tells me how they're doing. This is Linda Morris and Cheyenne saying goodbye to one another. And I just think that this photo just viscerally shows how connected Red Cross volunteers can become to the people we serve. Linda, who lives in Thurston, Oregon, is saying goodbye to Cheyenne, who is staying in a shelter in Kayau on the big island of Hawaii after Kilauea's lava flow displaced Cheyenne's family of 5 in 2018. Cheyenne was singing Ole Mahalo, a Hawaiian greeting of thanks for the giving of hospitality, love, generosity, and knowledge. I just talked to Linda the other day, and she says that she was saying to herself, "I'm not going to cry, I'm not going to cry." Linda retired as an administrator in the Springfield Fire Department in 2013 and became a Red Cross volunteer in 2017 after seeing the devastation Hurricanes Irma and Maria wrought in Puerto Rico. It really hit my heart, Linda said. While watching the scenes of chaos on television, she blurted out to her husband, "I have to go down there and speak my Spanish and help those people out." And her husband said to her, "If that's what you want to do, go do it." The next day, Linda went to the Southwestern Oregon Red Cross chapter office in Eugene and signed up. The required training kept her from making it to Puerto Rico, but her Spanish skills have come in handy during the more than a dozen Red Cross national disasters assignments she's been on since then. Linda loves to work in shelters, where she says lessons she learned from her grandmother, aunt, and mother serve her well. "I come from a long line of prayer warriors, caregivers, and jokers," Linda says. She's responded to floods, wildfires, and hurricanes, close to home in Oregon, in California, twice to Hawaii, and also to the East Coast. "I just love to be with my people in the shelters," Linda says. "When people run for their lives with nothing, they end up in the shelter. That's where I come in." This is a bulletin board at the shelter in the Oroville Nazarene Church during the campfire in 2018. And I'd like to end with this essay I wrote in 2018. Some background. Disasters don't care about special dates. I spent my 25th wedding anniversary, plus at least one birthday, Easter, Memorial Day, 4th of July, and Labor Day working on disasters. In 2018, the year I met Joe during the campfire, I spent Thanksgiving in Oroville. While in quarantine, waiting to no longer be contagious with the norovirus, I posted this essay online. My computer stopped working after sliding off a pile of papers in the shelter, so I wrote it on my tablet with one finger on a virtual keyboard. So this is it. "I miss my husband, I miss my little dog, and I missed celebrating with my youngest child after she learned she had passed the California bar exam last Friday. I miss morning walks with my friends, and I miss my soft bed with its down comforter and quilt, and I miss being able to walk outside and smell the perfume from one of the roses in my garden when I find the state of the world too much for the moment. On Thursday, I'll miss Thanksgiving with my friends and family. But when I think about why I'm missing those things, I don't really mind at all. I'm missing them because I volunteered to be one of the hundreds of Red Cross volunteers who answered the call to help comfort, shelter, and care for those who are missing everything they abandoned 10 days ago when they ran from their homes in front of heat and flames, some barefoot and only partly dressed. Paradise, an entire community of more than 26,000 people, is gone. Not just damaged and repairable, but gone. CAL FIRE says nearly 10,000 residences have been destroyed in the campfire, plus 367 businesses and workplaces as of Sunday, November 18th. So the fire was still going when I wrote this. There are still 1,200 people on the missing list, and while the Red Cross has reunited several hundred through our Safe and Well program, many will never be found. In the end, 85 people died in the fire. Many of those in our shelters don't know if their friends or families made it out. I'll gladly miss everything I know will be waiting for me when I return home in another week or so, in trade for being able to reassure someone's fears, listen to their story, or direct them to a resource. I've been witness to countless acts of generosity to a damaged community working together to survive an almost unimaginable tragedy. I'm proud to be part of an organization that allows me to participate in this community's recovery, to do what I can to help ease its pain. I don't know where I'll celebrate Thanksgiving on Thursday, but I do know I'll be grateful to be there. I ended up having Thanksgiving dinner in a casino buffet. They gave us free food. But I had this kind of amazing thing happen when I was researching this presentation, and I looked up that post that I just read you on Facebook. And I was kind of stunned to find a comment on it from my mother, Judith Wood. I was stunned because my mom died in 2021, but also I was stunned at how perfect what she said and how she said it is. So I'm going to read this to you because I want you to all do what Mom says. Thank you for your heartfelt depiction of what is going on with the people caught up in hell. When the flames are conquered and the smoke blows away, phase 2 will begin. Somehow, those what then questions will need to be answered, and the American Red Cross will be there, still in need of volunteers. If you cannot help out in this phase, perhaps your skill set will be needed later. We all have been wondering what we can do to bring this country together. The answer lies in giving of yourself. Get to know people on a human-to-human basis. Give whatever you can, time, dollars, skills, you name it. I shall forever remember my grandmother rolling bandages during World War II. Write postcards, make phone calls, rock your neighbor's child, love one another. Do what Mom said. Thank you all so much for being here, and if we have any time left, I can take a few questions.
Okay, well, thank you, Barbara, once again for taking the time to present this to us. Thank you all for being here on such an interesting weather night, so we do appreciate you finding your way here. And I wanted to remind you that, again, next month we have a different program for you. It'll be our Plein Air. This is an event that we've had to hold off a couple of years because of the pandemic, so there'll be a group of local artists that will have all their work presented, and it'll be for the full weekend, with the first Friday being that reception. So we have flyers at the back table, so if you're interested, please pick up one. You know, Barbara is a really special person, very empathetic, someone who's spent a lot of time helping others. And whatever organization, whether it be the Red Cross or any other, I'm fond of this quote by Clara Barton when she said, remember, a hand out, a hand up is not a handout. Because a lot of people have different impressions about organizations that try to help others, and they're just giving them handouts. So think about that. These are organizations that are trying to give a hand up, not a handout. So if you feel like contributing or being a volunteer, I'm sure there are many organizations out there that would be happy to have your assistance. So once again, thank you very much for coming this evening. We hope you enjoyed it. Have a safe journey home. Stay dry.